Welcome back to the Mr. G Computer Science channel. If you haven't already done so, please hit the subscribe button to get the latest videos. Don't forget to hit the like button for this video once you've had a chance to enjoy it. So now let's look at the exam question. The topic for today's video is two-dimensional arrays. The table below shows part of a two-dimensional array with the last 6 football matches that Newcastle United played. The array is named played games. So let's just first of all look at this table to ensure we understand its structure. So the team that Newcastle United played is in the column with the identifier of 0. The amount of goals scored by Newcastle is in column 1. The amount of goals conceded or goals scored against Newcastle is in column 2. Each row represents an opposition team that Newcastle United has played. So in this example, we can see in row 4, Newcastle played Tottenham, scored 6 goals against Tottenham and conceded 1 goal. So the example here is if we had a print statement and we printed the array identifier at row 4, column 0, we would have the output of Tottenham, because row 4, column 0, there's row 4, column 0, contains the data string Tottenham. Write a program to print the name of each team Newcastle have played and if the game was won, drawn or lost against Newcastle. For example, the Leeds game, 2 goals scored by Newcastle, conceded 2 goals, so that is a drawn game. Arsenal, no goals scored against Arsenal, 2 goals conceded against Arsenal, so Newcastle lost that game. Southampton, 3 goals scored against Southampton, 1 goal conceded, so the Southampton game was won by Newcastle. Finally, the algorithm will output how many points Newcastle United football team have from all of their games. So now let's look at the algorithm solution. Notice this exam question is worth 6 points and we will be looking at the marking criteria for that after we've looked at the pseudocode solution. Here we have the pseudocode solution. So let's look at the code. NUFC total equals 0. So this declares a variable called NUFC total and initializes it with the value of 0. Remember, initialization just means to give it its first value. We then have the start of our for loop. Now, it's worth remembering that the index positions of arrays always start with 0. There are 6 rows in our table. The index positions of these rows are 0 to 5. So now notice that the for loop is indented so we can easily see the start and the end of our loop. So it's given us a better understanding of the structure of the code. So for each of our 6 rows within the table, we are going to perform these if statements. So now let's look at the if statements in turn. So if the array at row 0, column 1 is greater than the array at row 0, column 2. In other words, if the goals scored is greater than the goals conceded, that would mean Newcastle have won their match. Therefore, we are going to add 3 to the current value of the variable NUFC total. We will then print the array row 0, column 0, which is the opposition team name. And then we would have the string literal won, so Newcastle would have won that match. If this if statement is false, then it will jump straight to line 9 and it will execute the code in the next if statement. If the array at row 0, column 1 is equal to the array at row 0, column 2, in other words, if the goals scored is equal to the goals conceded, then Newcastle have drawn that match. Therefore, we will add 1 or increment the NUFC total. We will also print the array at row 0, column 0, which is the opposition team name. And then we will print the string literal drawn. So Newcastle had drawn that match. If this statement is false, then we will execute this line here. In other words, if Newcastle didn't win their match, didn't draw their match, then they must have lost that match. It has no impact on the score, so we don't need to code any change to the score, but we do need to print the opposition team name. So row 0, column 0, that's the opposition team name, and then the string lost. So that is the end of the first pass through the for loop. In other words, while the row has the value of 0. So now the for loop will jump back to line 4 and row will now have the value of 1. So it will perform the same if statements on the data stored in row 1. Then it will perform the same if statements on row 2, then row 3, 4, and finally row 5. Once all 6 rows are processed, the for loop is complete and the final print statement will print the string literal Newcastle scoring points is, and then the data stored within the NUFC total. The structure of the if statement. If line 3 is true, lines 6 and 7 will be executed. And then the code will jump to the end of line 15. If line 5 is false, the code will jump to line 9. If this statement is true, it will execute lines 10 and 11. Once that's complete, it will jump to the end of the if statement. If this code on line 9 is false, the program will jump to line 13. So this indentation shows us and helps us understand our jump points. So if this is true, then in essence, we don't have to read this code because it's part of the else block. We can literally jump to the end of the if statement. Let's look at the mark allocation for this question. 1 mark for the use of iteration, in this case for loops. 1 mark for looping through each row within the array. 1 mark to print out each of the opposition team names. 1 mark to output whether that game was won, drawn or lost. 1 mark for the calculation of points, the adding of 3 points or 1 points. And the final mark for the outputting of the total for the score for the Newcastle United team. So now let's look at what the solution would look like in the Python programming language. I have copied the pseudocode into Python and made the appropriate modifications to ensure the syntax rules for Python are adhered to. So let's go through the program. We'll run it to ensure that it works. So this is not part of the exam question, but for the program to work, I've had to declare the two-dimensional array so we have data to process. So each row of the table is represented within its own square brackets. Each column is separated by a comma. So row 0, which is the leads row, column 0 would contain the string literal leads, column 1 the score 2, column 2 the score 2, and the same for the arsenal. So this is row 1, this is row 2, and so on. So that is our 2D declaration with our data within the 2D table. So some slight modifications to get this working in Python. The for loop has been slightly changed to use the range statement, going from 0 to 6. Now remember, the range statement will automatically take 1 off the 6, so this will go from 0 to 5, which is the appropriate numbers for the rows in the table. The if statements are virtually the same with the addition of the colons. Notice the omission of the end ifs and the next row. So let's see what it looks like when you run it. Here we can see the output of the program. We have the opposition name and the status of the match. So the Leeds match was drawn, the Arsenal match was lost, the Southampton match was won, Everton won, and so on. And the Newcastle score in points is 10. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to get the latest notifications for videos, and give us a thumbs up for the video.